Story 1. The Midnight Passenger. Derek was used to driving through the dead of night. He was a long-haul trucker, and nighttime runs were his specialty. But on a freezing January night in Montana, he felt something he rarely did: fear. The night was dark and heavy with a thick fog that swallowed his truck's headlights. It was nearing midnight, and the loneliness of the road began to gnaw at him. As he rounded a bend, he saw something that made him slam on the brakes. A figure was standing in the middle of the road. She looked out of place, young, wearing an old-fashioned dress, her hair wet as if she'd just stepped out of a rainstorm. Derek leaned out of his cab and shouted to her, but she didn't respond. He offered her a ride, assuming she was in trouble, and she silently climbed into the passenger seat. For the first hour, she said nothing, just stared straight ahead. Then she began mumbling under her breath. Derek caught snippets, something about her family, and how they were coming. His heart raced as he tried to ask her questions, but her answers were disjointed, as if she were talking to someone else entirely. As they approached a desolate stretch of road, she suddenly turned to him, her face pale and her eyes wide. "Stop the truck," she whispered. Derek was terrified but did as she asked, pulling off onto a side road. As soon as the truck stopped, she opened the door and stepped out, disappearing into the fog. Confused and unnerved, Derek stayed in his cab, gripping the wheel. Suddenly, he heard a banging sound coming from the trailer. It grew louder and louder, like someone, or something, was desperately trying to escape. Gathering his courage, Derek stepped out of the cab and approached the back of the trailer. When he opened it, he found nothing but an old, musty suitcase lying in the middle. Tentatively, he opened it, and what he saw inside made him stagger back in horror: a woman's dress, identical to the one worn by the passenger, and a diary filled with cryptic messages, each one ending with, "I'll find my family." Derek climbed back into his truck, drove away, and never picked up a passenger again. Story 2. The Campfire's Last Story. Every fall, a group of friends went camping at Blackwood Forest. They were thrill-seekers, lovers of the outdoors, and had a tradition of sharing ghost stories around the campfire on the last night of their trip. That year, Chris, the youngest of the group, claimed to have the scariest story of all, a tale so terrifying it had left its previous tellers disturbed for life. As they sat in a circle, the firelight flickering off their faces, Chris began the story. He spoke of an old tale from the 1800s about a woodsman who lived deep in Blackwood Forest. He was rumored to have lost his mind, driven mad by isolation and paranoia, and spent his nights wandering the forest with a lantern, muttering to himself. The story goes that anyone who made eye contact with him would be cursed to join him, wandering the forest aimlessly for eternity. The group laughed nervously, dismissing it as just another ghost story. But as the fire died down, they began to feel uneasy, casting suspicious glances at the forest around them. They packed up and climbed into their tents, trying to ignore the eerie feeling lingering in the air. Around midnight, Sarah, one of the campers, woke up to a faint glow outside her tent. She opened it just a crack and froze. There, standing at the edge of the campsite, was a figure holding a lantern. She tried to scream, but her voice was caught in her throat. The figure slowly moved toward the tents, pausing at each one as if inspecting them. Sarah closed her eyes, praying it would go away. After what felt like an eternity, the light disappeared. The next morning, the group packed up hurriedly, shaken by the experience. But when they tried to leave, they discovered the path out of the forest was blocked by thick, overgrown vines that hadn't been there before. In the days that followed, they wandered, trying to find their way out, but every path led back to their campsite. They were trapped, endlessly circling, with only the ghostly glow of the woodsman's lantern lighting the night. Story 3. The Phantom Train. Jackson loved urban exploration, and he'd seen everything from abandoned factories to forgotten hospitals. But when he heard about the legend of the Phantom Train in the ghost town of Emberstone, he couldn't resist. According to locals, a train that once transported miners to the remote mountain town had mysteriously disappeared one stormy night in 1903, taking all the passengers with it. Legend had it that the train still roamed the tracks on certain foggy nights, the souls of its passengers trapped forever. Jackson set off one misty evening, his flashlight cutting through the heavy fog as he walked along the old railway tracks. He kept his camera rolling, hoping to capture evidence of the phantom train. Hours passed, and just as he was about to give up, he heard it, a distant, echoing whistle. The fog grew thicker, and the faint sound of wheels rolling on tracks reached his ears. Jackson's heart raced as he saw the outline of an old, rusted train emerging from the fog. Its windows were dark, but he could make out shadowy figures inside. He waved his flashlight, hoping to get a closer look. But as the train drew near, he felt an unnatural chill, and a voice whispered from somewhere in the darkness, "Come aboard, join us." Despite his fear, Jackson's curiosity won out. He took a step toward the train, mesmerized by the empty, hollow eyes of the passengers staring back at him. But as he reached for the handle of the train door, he felt a strong hand on his shoulder. Whirling around, he saw nothing, but a voice warned, "Don't do it. Once you're on, you'll never leave." He stumbled backward, tripping over a broken rail. When he looked up, the train had vanished. Only silence remained, but Jackson knew the train wasn't gone. It was waiting, somewhere in the fog, for its next passenger. Jackson returned home that night, haunted by the shadows of the passengers staring at him from the train's windows. Every time he closed his eyes, he could see them, beckoning him to join them on their eternal journey. He never went near a railway again, but the phantom whistle sometimes echoed in his dreams, a chilling reminder of the journey he almost took.